For everyone who doesn't know Mahnoor is a Pakistani therapist who's based in DC. She's been my supervisor for a number of years. She's doing excellent work. And this conversation did come out just like this, that some of these chats have been so rich that we thought that let's take some snippets just for public viewing, what they can learn about Mahnoor's work from that. So hi Mahnoor, how are you doing?
Hi, Amar. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. Mahnoor, I know you work a lot with young adults. Can you say a bit more about your work, who you work with, what some of those problems might be that you work with?
Yeah, so I primarily work with the young adult population. And so most of my clients are around the age of, let's say, 18 to their early 30s. And so I really see people in like very different stages of their lives at that point, right? I mean, I have clients who are in college, those who are in gap years, they're starting their first job, they're getting married, they're having kids. So really, I kind of see some of the biggest transformations that people are going through in this age
Mm,
group.
okay. And while you work with this specific population, are there any themes that emerge for you? Something that ties up a lot of that work.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest theme again that emerges is that there's a lot of transition happening, right? And it's transition that's happening every few years for a lot of these people. And so in my work, I've seen kind of both positive and negative transitions happening, right? And here I'm talking about positive transitions as those that are ones that we're looking forward to, or that we work towards, or that we actually want to kind of take the next step in that direction. While negative ones are those I'm classifying as ones that might be very distressful, something we've been forced into, something we've not quite been anticipating.
Can you give examples of either?
So with positive transitions, I'm talking more about, let's say, getting into your dream university, landing that
Mm,
job that you really wanted, maybe marrying the person of your choice, wanting to be parents and having a child.
mm,
And examples of negative transitions would look something like, well, but not having any one of those things that I just mentioned, or even other
mm.
unfortunate news such as, dealing with an illness in the family, dealing with death, things not panning out with visa issues, for example, is one that comes up very often.
Okay. And what do you notice when you're working with these transitions? Are there particular things that while you're working with this, obviously a broad range of people with a broad range of concerns that they bring to therapy to
Yeah.
you, what do you notice in that?
So I think that there's something that you really don't need a therapist to tell you, which is that
Mm,
when transitions are negative, we mostly anticipate that we're not going to be feeling too good about them. And so when clients bring those into therapy, what I really observe is that, they're much more okay with kind of talking about how, things aren't going too well for them, or how, they're not feeling good about something. And there's more, let's say, acceptance of that negative experience of that in
mm,
that moment. What I also notice is that they also talk much more about how people around them are rallying together to support them in that time as well, right? So there are friends and family who are reaching out. Perhaps there's a supervisor at work who's being particularly helpful
mm,
and giving time off. Maybe there are instructors who are assisting with, let's say, grad school applications or something of that sort. But what was also very interesting was that, one would assume that with positive transitions, if someone's excited or they're happy. And while I do see those emotions as well in therapy, I see an equal number of people also being very overwhelmed by those experiences as
mm.
well. And so they're not doing as okay as they thought they might be when something good is happening in their lives, something that they've actually really wanted.
Whereas it's assumed that if something good is happening in your life, if you've landed that dream job in another country, or you're getting married to a partner that you've wanted to, those are good things. Or you wanted to have a baby and now you're finally having that baby. So these are meant to be things that you're meant to just be happy about. Why would someone be concerned or seek therapy? Is there some particular emotions that you're working with there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people report feeling very overwhelmed. They're feeling very anxious
Mm,
about the change that is happening. There's a lot of fear around, what's going to happen next. And so I think a lot of that is still centered around how, they've thought about how their routines are going to be changing, right? And so
mm,
we'll notice a lot of people really planning around how, maybe I'm moving to a new job, so I need to like hire a cab share service, or maybe I need to get an apartment somewhere, or, I have a child, so I'm going to make a baby registry. I'm going to take like paternity leave or maternity leave, and I'm going to hire childcare or whoever can come and support. But there are three R's that I notice that people really do not place a lot of
mm,
emphasis on, right? And I see those as the roles that people are playing,
mm,
and how those are changing. And there's not a lot of focus on how when this new role, which leads me to the next R, what responsibilities come up for
mm.
them. And sometimes they're not even realizing all these new responsibilities that they've taken up as as they're going through these life transitions. And then also, of course, what impact that has on the relationships as well, right? Because let's say perhaps it might not be as available to some relationships that already exist in their lives because well, they're so busy dealing with such a big thing that's happened. And that can definitely lead again to a lot of distress. And I use distress here as an umbrella term for a lot of negative
Mm.
emotions.
Okay. Such as?
So again, a lot of fear comes up. There's a lot of
Okay.
anxiety. There's a lot of sadness.
Mhm.
There's a lot of feeling overwhelmed. In fact, overwhelm, I think, is a word that I hear very often when it comes to people, going through transitions, both positive and negative. But there are two emotions that I
Mm.
find, particularly, I want to use the word dangerous here when it comes to
Mm.
transitions, right? With one of those emotions being guilt. And guilt often comes up with people kind of evaluating how they're doing their work. So it's a lot of statements like, I should have done much better at my work because I should have known this. Or,
Mm.
I should be okay with this new role that I have as a mom because I wanted this. And therefore, I should know how to look after my child. I should know how to attend to every need of theirs. And so it's more evaluative of their actions,
Mm.
whereas perhaps an even more dangerous, and I want to say subtle emotion that comes up as well. And I say subtle not in terms of its impact, but rather how it's very covert. Even in therapy, we're kind of really exploring and walking around a lot of topics before we get to that point that what they're actually feeling is shame.
Mm.
Um, and I see shame as an emotion that where they're very kind of judgmental of their own selves, and they're perceiving that the world around them will also be judgmental of them as a person. So you would notice a lot of statements like, if I don't know how to do my job, maybe I'm an incompetent worker,
Yeah.
or right, or if I don't know how to make my child stop crying, maybe like my mom or like my mother-in-law or someone will see me being a bad
Mm.
parent.
Mm.
Or if I'm busy, let's say with my work, then maybe I'm a partner who isn't good enough for my husband or wife or
Mm.
whoever it is at that point. And why I use the word dangerous here is because I feel like transitions are anyway incredibly isolating, right? Because while for a lot of people in your
Yeah.
lives, things remain constant, and here you're going through something pretty big, and hopefully positive, but in both cases, positive or negative. And then with guilt and shame kind of coming in, especially with shame, there's a lot of ideas around feeling very exposed if people find out that I'm not doing quite okay in this
Mm.
in this new role that I have with these new responsibilities, and I don't want them to figure out that maybe I'm not as available to them. So again, the three R's that I mentioned earlier, the roles.
And I can see how that's such a important lens that if we're looking at how the roles, responsibilities, and the relationships they're being affected by something that probably can be assumed that, oh, but something good is happening. But as each of these changes, how that affects not only some of the other R's, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
but also how that internal experience of either that guilt or that shame continues to impact an individual.
Yeah, and so what you see is that you ideally want a lot of support at this time, right? Perhaps you need
Mm.
support which is logistical. Perhaps you just need someone to remind you that things are going to be okay. Sometimes a reminder from a partner or family can be really helpful, right? That you did this the last time as well, so you can do this again. But instead, I think shame leads people to isolate themselves further because they're so scared of being seen in these roles that they themselves also see them not fulfilling too well,
Mm.
that they don't want anyone else to kind of witness that either. And so they end up isolating themselves even further. They're not reaching out to friends and family. They're unwilling to even talk about it in therapy. And this is a space where, they have a relationship with a therapist already.
I can also see that there might be other layers to this, that shame is also now spread across our social media, which is that you're
Yeah.
continuously also seeing a lot of people how they're parenting. You're also seeing influencers how they are parenting. You're also seeing
Yeah.
in if you have another kid, you're also seeing how those 30 odd parents are also parenting their kids, and there are so many of those influences that are reminding you of your own role and your own responsibilities and where you're failing at. And then there's also that comparativeness that in some of your
Yeah.
primary relationships, let's say that if your parent parented you in a certain way, that they gave up their life just to attend to you. Now if you're trying to juggle work and a partner and also deciding to have a family, and you're doing that, there's also that comparativeness, which is that, oh, but I'm doing something wrong. And lots of times there are those
Yeah.
subtle reminders, not only from that family system, but it might also be coming from social media. Is that something that you notice in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think again, it really depends on what kind of transition they're going through, right? But
Mm,
I think you kind of highlighted all the important factors that really reinforce all of these expectations that people have internalized over time, right? Which then causes them to evaluate themselves so negatively. And because they've kind of picked it up from people around them, whether that's their friends or family or, things they've grown up hearing, what, the elders of the family are now telling them, what they see influence is doing, very importantly, there's this idea that I'm definitely not doing too well. So when that comparison happens, it leads them to shame themselves even further and then further isolate themselves. So they'll see, for example, someone you brought up, parenting techniques. I think that's a very big part of social media at this point. You have see a lot of influencers talking about this,
mm,
and then this mom is sitting at home and she's thinking that, oh well, like I haven't lost that weight, or my child is still doing screen time, but she seems to be doing all of these like sensory activity for the child. And
yeah.
what am I doing wrong? I don't want people to know that my child is having sugar or they're having screen time. Yeah.
And then I think that while there's a snippet of another person's life being presented in a certain way that you're now viewing, and you're looking at all the messiness in your own life, and you look at that fragment and you compare your own struggle, what you're being challenged with, and it seems like you're failing at something. And I want to know, which
Yeah.
is that a general assumption that people might make is that, yeah, I mean, you're going through something or something difficult is happening. What's the big deal? Why do you need therapy for that? So how do you fit into the lives of some of these young adults who are going through transitions, difficult things for them? The generic advice might be that, yeah, I mean, time will heal it all. Why do you need further support? So how are you supporting them?
So I think one of the main things that happens in these transitions is something that I brought up earlier, which is that there's a lot of focus on like the logistical element of things, right? About
Mm,
how things are changing and I'm going to be focusing on them. And so therefore you see a lot of future oriented kind of thought processes and experiences coming up that, tomorrow I have to do this, or the next week I have to plan for XYZ thing and I have to put this on my schedule.
mm,
But what they're really not focusing on is what's coming up for them in the here and now. So what kind of emotional experiences are coming in and how they're really impacting how they're kind of even moving through these transitions, right? And so I think therapy is a great space. And I love working with my clients on this to kind
mm,
of bring this very mindful awareness right now to what's happening right now and what emotions are coming up. And one of the best techniques that I find in working with my clients to just get them to name the emotions that are coming up for
mm,
them. And oftentimes they're surprised to even see what emotions come up.
mm,
And what I usually observe in my work with clients is that when they actually are identifying what emotions are coming up, they're much more likely to kind of lean into that experience and talk about, well, yeah, I noticed that this is coming up, as opposed to saying, why is this coming up?
mm,
And I see them then kind of working through these transitions with this expectation, allowing themselves that buffer that, I will maybe continue feeling a certain way for a specific
mm.
amount of time. And I'll see where it goes, as opposed to that constant pressure that, I must do well, I must not let people see.
Uh-huh. You mentioned techniques. I know that in your degree at Columbia, that was very CBT oriented, and it might have been a lot about what to do and how, and a very structured
Yeah.
approach. But over the years, as I've seen your work transition, I've also seen a lot of other elements come in. So can you say a bit more about your own process? That how has your work been evolving? How you now look at transitions? What your personal take on that might be?
Yeah, so I use a lot of CBT in my work even now, and
Mm,
I find CBT to be a great tool to work with clients who are, especially those who are new to therapy. I think that CBT offers a lot of structure, which for someone who's new to therapy and can definitely find it overwhelming, it can be great to work with.
mm,
And the entire idea that your thoughts, your behaviors, and emotions are interlinked, and that triangle that comes up in CBT. I think clients really like that idea, and they're able to really kind of start separating their experiences very early on with CBT. What I do find limiting about CBT though is that it's very which is also of course a plus point, but also the downside that it is very goal oriented. It's very directive, right? And I think in transitions, there's already all of that pressure to be changing. There's already all of that pressure to know what to do the next thing. And so I think that in as my work has shifted, and there's a lot more focus on people's emotional experiences, how people are feeling in the here and now, I noticed that that actually shifts the pressure from changing to actually just allowing them to observe themselves and actually lead to more acceptance rather than constantly pushing for change.
I'm also imagining that as a therapist, there's lesser pressure on you, which is that you are guiding the transition in some way, which is that, oh, tell me how to do this, or how can I do three things here so that I don't feel this. Instead, what you're doing is that you're providing that supportive place where they're bringing in that conflict, where there's a gap between where they are and where they need to be. And while you're holding that safe space for them, where especially, I mean, it's how you presented the dangerous emotions, that guilt and shame is coming up, which it might be a lot more difficult in presenting that to even a friend, or it might be difficult
Mm.
in relaying that to a parent or a partner or anyone else. This becomes that safe space where a lot of that can come together. It can be explored. Those emotions can be talked about. And in my experience, a lot of times there are deeper layers to even those, which is that some of the
Mhm.
experiences of guilt and shame, this might not have been the first time that they're experiencing. Then there are a lot of other contexts, especially trauma contexts, where these might have
Yeah.
been felt in the past, and now in this stressful transition, they're resurfacing.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only does it shift the pressure from the therapist to be telling them
Mm,
what to do, but I also think that it also really reinforces that non-judgmental element that we bring into therapy, right?
mm,
Because let's say I might have gone through a lot of those transitions myself, right? And if I
mm,
start kind of preaching them or telling them what to do and what direction they should be headed in, it's essentially not me working with them on their process anymore. It's a lot of me telling them what should happen next, and
mm,
that might just not work for them. So I think it's incredibly empowering for the client to actually recognize what kind of strengths they've had or what kind of experiences they've had and how they can use those to then move forward, as opposed to having someone else tell them that XYZ is what you
okay.
should be doing
Okay.
next.
And I'm also thinking that in some ways, when you are sitting in that therapy room with someone who's, let's say, much younger than you, someone who's just doing their O level or A level, or someone who's just entering into college, they are looking up to you as someone who's
Yeah.
possibly gone through those lifespan issues already. So I'm just wondering, how do you bring your own transitions in? Do you even bring them in? Are you comfortable in disclosing some things about your life? How do your own examples feature in your work?
I think that's really been a process for me as well as a
Mm,
therapist,
mm,
which is that I think the where I initially came from and the school of thought I would initially work from would talk a lot more about a therapist not really disclosing much in
mm,
therapy, right? But as I sat with my clients, and of course in my own process of both therapy and supervision, what I found incredibly helpful was just to kind of see my therapist and my supervisor as human as well. But
mm,
they've gone through these things as well.
mm.
And so, yes, sometimes I do bring up certain transitions that I've made. With a lot of clients, for example, who are moving for school overseas, I often talk about how, I really did not like moving overseas initially
Yeah.
for grad school, and how it eventually turned out to be something
Mm.
that I look back on very fondly. But it was a transition, right? It's not something that
Yeah.
happened on day one, even though that was something I wanted.
So in some ways, you're also normalizing them. That whereas
Yeah,
there's the fear
absolutely.
around them, there's the guilt, there's the shame, there's all the overwhelm, there's not knowing how we can, there's the sense that I'm incompetent maybe in
Yeah,
some ways, or maybe I'm not doing it right. In some ways, the therapist is humanized. They themselves are coming in, not only being comfortable in disclosing their own transitions, but actually inviting the person to explore theirs as not something that they're doing wrong, but something that is just a very normal process of growing upwards or downwards,
absolutely.
or whatever
Yeah,
that might be. Okay.
yeah,
I think this has been a wonderful chat, Manur, and I think that for people who are listening, I that's what I wanted for some of my supervisees and colleagues, for their work to be showcased, and also some very interesting themes that is a part of our everyday work that we talk about for the general public, for them to know that what sort of work therapists are doing and how they can be coming in and helping people with their lifespan issues. Okay,
absolutely
all
got
right,
it.
great. Thank you for speaking with me today. Okay,
Thanks, Summer. Thank you for having me
you're
here.
very